The fireworks began a few seconds early, cracking open the sky above the mountain resort like fractures of light. Lena stood on the balcony with a chilled glass of champagne pressed between her palms, watching colors bloom and vanish into smoke. Below, strangers cheered and hugged, counting down a future that felt loud, hopeful, and certain. From a distance, it looked like celebration. Up close, it felt like pretending. Behind her, inside the dimly lit suite, Ethan lingered near the window, his reflection hovering the glass like someone undecided about whether to leave or stay. He smiled when the countdown reached 0, lifted his glass, and said, "Happy New Year," with the careful politeness of a man greeting a co-worker. The words landed wrong. They always did lately. Lena tried to ignore the tightness in her chest. This trip was supposed to be a reset. His idea, technically, a New Year getaway. He'd said, somewhere quiet, somewhere romantic, somewhere they could remember why they chose each other. She had clung to that promise during the long drive up, replaying old versions of them in her mind. Shared jokes, late-night talks, hands finding each other without thinking. But even now, with fireworks exploding overhead, Ethan didn't step closer. He didn't reach for her hand. His phone buzzed once on the table behind him, the screen lighting up the room for a split second before he flipped it face down. Too fast. Too practiced. "You cold?" he asked. "A little," she lied, because the truth felt heavier than the mountain air. They toasted anyway. Glass met glass. The champagne fizzed and burned as Lena swallowed, forcing herself to smile, while something unspoken pressed down on her. She studied Ethan's face, the familiar angles, the eyes that once softened when they met hers. Tonight, they seemed distant, fixed on something far beyond the balcony. Inside, the room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and expensive cologne. Their bags sat half unpacked, like they weren't sure how long they were staying. Lena noticed that too and hated herself for noticing. Every detail had begun to feel like a clue, even though she didn't yet know to what. "Did you make a wish?" she asked, trying to sound light. Ethan hesitated just a beat too long. "Yeah," he said finally, something like that. The fireworks tapered off, leaving behind drifting smoke and an uncomfortable quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed, laughter echoing. Life moved forward for everyone else. In their suite, time felt suspended. Lena leaned on the railing, staring into the dark valley below. She told herself this feeling was just nerves, that the new year would soften him, that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow always carried that promise. Behind her, Ethan checked his phone again, turning slightly away this time. Lena didn't see the screen. She only felt the distance grow, invisible but unmistakable, settling between them like a third presence. As midnight slipped into morning, the champagne went flat, the fireworks faded, and the hope Lena had carried into the new year thinned into something fragile. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last moment before everything broke. By the time the sun rose, Ethan would finally say the words he'd been holding back, and the new year would begin with an ending. Morning arrived without celebration. Pale winter light crept through the thin curtains, settling over the suite in a way that felt intrusive, like it was exposing things better left hidden. Lena lay awake long before the alarm, listening to the slow rhythm of Ethan's breathing beside her. Sometime during the night, he had turned away from her, his back a firm line she didn't cross. She watched the ceiling, replaying midnight again and again, the hesitation in his voice, the phone he wouldn't let out of reach. The unease she tried to drown in champagne had only sharpened with sobriety. When Ethan finally stirred, it wasn't a stretch or a yawn. He sat up abruptly, as if he'd been awake too, waiting. "I need to talk to you," he said. The sentence landed softly, but Lena's body reacted as if it were a blow. Her heart began to race, each beat loud in her ears. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, bracing for something she couldn't name yet. Ethan swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. He didn't look at her. Instead, he paced once, twice, then stopped near the window, his hands pressed flat against the glass. Outside, the mountains stood indifferent, dusted with snow that sparkled deceptively in the sun. "I don't think this is working anymore," he said. Lena blinked. "The trip?" she asked, grasping at the wrong thing because the right one felt too big to hold. He exhaled slowly. Us. The room seemed to tilt. She sat up, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, cold biting into her skin. What do you mean, us? Her voice sounded thin, unfamiliar. Ethan finally turned to face her. His expression was composed, almost calm, and that terrified her more than anger would have. I want a divorce, he said, clearly this time. Deliberately, as if saying it cleanly would make it hurt less. For a moment, Lena couldn't breathe. The words echoed, hollow and impossible, refusing to settle into meaning. Divorce belonged to other people's stories, to strangers and statistics. Not to them. Not to a New Year morning, in a place meant for fresh starts. You're serious? She asked. He nodded once. I've been thinking about it for a while. A while. The phrase scraped against her. Then why are we here? She demanded, heat finally breaking through the shock. Why bring me here if you already decided to leave? Ethan looked away again. I thought maybe it would feel different. I thought I could make it work. So this was a test? Her hands shook as she clenched them into fists. A test I didn't even know I was taking? That's not fair, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I didn't plan it like that. Silence stretched between them, heavy and brittle. Lena searched his face for cracks, regret, guilt, something human, but found only distance. It was as if he'd already stepped into another life and was speaking to her from across a divide. Is there someone else? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Ethan stiffened, just slightly. It was enough. No, he said too quickly. This isn't about that. But the answer didn't land right. Lena felt it settle somewhere deep, unresolved, waiting. Then explain it to me, she whispered. Explain how you can end everything with one sentence. He hesitated, lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. I can't, he said finally. Not right now. The finality in his tone sliced through what little hope she had left. Lena stared at him, realizing this conversation wasn't the beginning of a discussion. It was a delivery of a decision already made. Ethan reached for his jacket, moving with quiet efficiency. I'm going to take a walk, he said. We can talk more later. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the stillness. Alone, Lena sat on the edge of bed, the words I want a divorce looping in her mind. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, her gaze drifted to the nightstand, where Ethan's phone lay face down, vibrating once before going still. And for the first time, Lena wondered if the truth was closer than he'd let on. The phone stopped vibrating before Lena found the courage to reach for it. For several seconds, she only stared, her mind still circling the sentence Ethan had left behind like a bruise. I want a divorce. The words echoed louder in the quiet suite, louder than the heater humming beneath the window, louder than her own breathing. She told herself not to touch the phone. Whatever lived inside, it was not meant for her. Yet the space Ethan had carved between them felt filled with unanswered questions, and questions have weight. They pull. They demand. Lena stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and crossed the room. The phone was warm when she picked it up, as if it had just been held. The screen lit instantly, no lock, no hesitation, as though it were waiting. A notification banner lingered at the top. Noah. Did you tell her yet? The name hit first. Short, intimate, not a co-worker's name, not someone she'd heard in passing. Her fingers tightened around the phone as the rest of the message faded from view, replaced by Ethan's home screen. A photo of the two of them, taken years ago, laughing into the sun, stared back at her like a cruel joke. Lena's pulse roared in her ears. Did you tell her yet? The words replayed, rearranging everything she thought she knew about the last 12 hours, about the last few months. Suddenly, moments she had dismissed returned sharper, clearer. Ethan canceling dinners. The way he'd stopped asking about her day. The nights he stayed up late, face glowing blue in the dark. She hadn't imagined it. She hadn't been paranoid. She'd been managed. Her thumb hovered over the message thread. She hesitated. This was a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But the damage was already done. The sentence that ended their marriage had opened something else entirely. She tapped. The thread unfolded in quiet betrayal. Not explicit, not obscene. Worse, tender. Long messages stretched back weeks, then months. Inside jokes she didn't understand. Photos of places she didn't recognize. One message stood out, time-stamped just days earlier. New Year will be easier once it's over. Lena lowered herself on the edge of the bed, the room tilting slightly as if the ground beneath her had shifted. This wasn't an affair born overnight. It was a life being planned somewhere just beyond her reach. Footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway outside, and panic surged through her. She exited the thread, placing the phone back exactly where she'd found it, face down, her hands trembling. The suite felt different now, smaller, charged with meaning. She glanced around as if the walls themselves might be watching her. When Ethan returned, he was quieter than before. His jacket was dusted with snow, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "You okay?" he asked, not meeting her eyes. She swallowed. "I'm fine." The lie tasted bitter, but it held. They moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing borrowed space. Ethan began packing, folding clothes with a precision that felt rehearsed. Lena watched him, searching for Noah's shape in his gestures, in the way he smiled faintly at nothing. "Who is Noah?" she asked suddenly. Ethan froze. Just for a moment. It was enough. His shoulders stiffened before he turned, confusion quickly masking something darker. "What?" "Your phone," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. It lit up. Silence stretched thin and dangerous. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have looked." That was the answer. Lena felt something break. Not loudly, not all at once, but with a quiet finality. "So it's true," she said. "You didn't leave me for nothing. You left me for someone." Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple." But it was simple enough. Simple enough to have a name. As he turned away again, Lena realized she no longer just wanted answers. She wanted to understand who Noah was, and how far Ethan had already gone without her. The name lingered in her mind long after the room fell silent again, pulling her toward a truth she wasn't meant to find, but now couldn't ignore. The name refused to leave Lena's thoughts. Noah. It echoed through the quiet hours after Ethan fell asleep on the couch, his back turned, his phone tucked beneath his jacket, like something precious. Lena lay awake in the bed they were no longer sharing, staring into the dark, replaying the fragments she'd seen. She hadn't read everything. She'd been too shaken, but she'd read enough to know that Noah wasn't an accident. He was a decision. By morning, Ethan was gone again, claiming he needed space. Lena didn't argue. She watched him leave, the door closing softly behind him, and felt a strange clarity settle in. If he wouldn't explain, she would find the truth herself. She started carefully, not hacking, not snooping wildly, just listened to what Ethan had already let slip over the years. He traveled often for work. Conferences, extended layovers, the occasional detour he brushed off as networking. One trip returned to her now with uncomfortable sharpness. A month abroad the previous spring. Somewhere warm. Somewhere he described as freeing. Lena opened her laptop and searched for Ethan's old itineraries, emails he'd once shared for logistics. A city surfaced again and again, one she'd never visited, one he'd spoken about with a softness he never used at home. From there, the trail widened. Noah's social media wasn't hard to find once she knew where to look. He was public in a way Ethan had never been. Photos spilled across the screen. Hostels, beaches, crowded markets. Strangers becoming friends in a single frame. And there, in the background of several pictures, Lena spotted a familiar silhouette. Ethan, always half-turned, never tagged. Her stomach twisted. Noah was younger. Not dramatically, but enough to feel significant. He wore his life lightly, messy hair, sun-browned skin, a smile that looked unburdened by routine. In his captions, he wrote about movement, about not belonging to one place or one person for too long. Some connections aren't meant to last. One post read, "They're meant to wake you up." Lena closed the laptop, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't just about attraction. It was about escape. When Ethan returned that afternoon, she was ready. "You met him while you were traveling," she said, not a question. He stopped short, key still in hand. "I told you," he began, defensive already. "You didn't tell me anything," she cut in. "I pieced it together. Another country. Another version of you." The silence that followed was heavy, but different now. Tired. Ethan's shoulders slumped as if holding the truth back had finally cost too much. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said quietly. "We were just talking at first." "Talking doesn't end marriages," Lena replied. He looked at her, then really looked, and something like guilt flickered. "I didn't plan to fall for him." "Fall." The word burned. "Noah doesn't even live anywhere," Lena said. "He drifts. He leaves." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't know him." "I know enough," she said. "Enough to know you chose a fantasy over a life." Ethan turned away, pacing. With him, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like I was disappointing someone every day. The words landed like blows. Lena absorbed them in silence, understanding dawning in pieces. This wasn't just about love. It was about power, about Ethan rewriting their history, so he could justify leaving without guilt. "So what?" she asked finally. "You just walk away and pretend the rest of us doesn't exist?" He hesitated. "I want to be honest now." The cruelty of that almost made her laugh. That night, as Ethan slept restlessly on the couch, Lena sat alone with the knowledge she'd uncovered. Noah wasn't just a man from another country. He was the doorway Ethan had already stepped through. And Lena realized something else, darker and more unsettling. Knowing the truth hadn't brought her peace. It had given her direction. By the time the trip ended, Lena wasn't just a wife being left behind. She was someone with a destination of her own, one that would lead her straight into the life Ethan thought he'd escaped. The idea came quietly, disguised as necessity. After they checked out of the resort, Ethan insisted on traveling alone. He said it was better that way. That space would help them both process. Lena watched him load his bag into a rideshare, his movements efficient, detached, as if he were leaving a hotel, not a marriage. He didn't look back when the car pulled away. She stood there long after it disappeared, snow seeping through the soles of her shoes, telling herself she only needed answers. Closure. Something solid to replace the fog he'd left behind. Back home, the house felt unfamiliar, rearranged by absence. Ethan had taken more than clothes, documents, a spare charger, the passport he rarely touched unless he planned to disappear. Lena moved through the room slowly, touching objects as if they might confirm she hadn't imagined the last decade. That night, she opened her laptop again. At first, she limited herself to what felt reasonable. Shared accounts, old calendars, receipts automatically forwarded to email. Patterns emerged, small, innocuous on her own, undeniable together. Flights booked late at night. Locations Ethan had sworn were last-minute changes. Payments that coincided with Noah's posts abroad. Lena told herself she wasn't spying. She was reconstructing the truth Ethan had dismantled. When that wasn't enough, she went further. She logged into the location-sharing app they'd installed years earlier for emergencies. He must have forgotten to turn it off. A blue that appeared on the map, pulsing softly. Alive. Real. Moving. Her breath caught. It wasn't headed to anywhere familiar. It traveled toward an airport. She watched longer than she meant to, tracking the slow progress of a life no longer including her. Hours passed unnoticed. The house grew dark around her, the screen casting a pale glow across her face. When the dot stopped moving, so did she. The next morning, she woke with the map still open. Ethan was gone. Not metaphorically, physically. The blue now hovered over a city she recognized instantly, one she'd seen too many times in Noah's photos. Her chest tightened, a mix of dread and clarity. So this was real. Immediate. Not someday now. She began building a timeline. Screenshots saved. Notes scribbled. She followed flight trackers, cross-referencing arrival times with posts Noah uploaded hours later. It became disturbingly easy. They weren't hiding. They didn't think anyone was looking. Each discovery delivered a sharp, electric jolt, pain threaded with purpose. Lena ate little, slept less. Her thoughts narrowed until everything pointed in one direction. Just understand it, she told herself. Then you can let go. But letting go never came. Instead, she crossed a line she'd once sworn she never would. She booked a flight. One way. She told no one. Packed lightly. Rationalized everything. If Ethan could uproot their life without warning, she could follow the truth wherever it led. At the airport, Lena stood in line with strangers heading toward vacations, reunions, new beginnings. Her reflection in the terminal glass startled her, eyes too bright, jaw set with unfamiliar resolve. This wasn't revenge, she insisted. It was completion. As the plane lifted off, she felt both weightless and anchored, suspended between who she had been and who she was becoming. Somewhere below, the distance between her and Ethan shrank mile by mile. She didn't know yet how far she would go. She only knew that by the time she landed, watching would no longer be enough. The city greeted Lena with unfamiliar sounds, foreign accents colliding, traffic humming in restless patterns, music spilling from cafes she would have once photographed, once admired. Now, everything felt muted, as if she were moving through glass. She wasn't here to see the city. She was here to see him. She checked into a small hotel near the center, choosing it not for comfort, but for proximity. From a window, she could see the street below, a narrow ribbon of movement and possibility. Her phone buzzed almost immediately after she set her bag down. The blue, that pulse again, close enough now that it felt personal. Ethan was less than 2 miles away. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, grounding herself. This was still about understanding. She reminded herself about seeing the truth with her own eyes so it could finally stop haunting her imagination. She waited, through careful observation, nothing reckless, nothing impulsive. She began to map his days, when he left the apartment he'd rented, the cafe he visited each morning, the time he disappeared each evening, only to return hours later, lighter somehow, less burdened, less married. Watching him was surreal. From a distance, Ethan looked younger, freer. He laughed more easily here. He blended into this life as though he'd been rehearsing for it all along. And then there was Noah. Lena saw him for the first time on the 3rd day. He emerged from a bookstore beside Ethan, shoulder brushing his, close enough that the intimacy was unmistakable. Noah spoke animatedly, gesturing with his hands, his energy spilling outward. Ethan leaned in to listen, smiling in a way Lena hadn't seen in years. Something inside her cracked. She followed them at a safe distance, her heart pounding, her senses sharpened. They walked like people with nowhere else to be, stopping without urgency, touching casually, hands on backs, fingers grazing wrists. Not hidden, not ashamed. Lena filmed nothing, took no photos. She didn't want proof. She wanted comprehension. She wanted to understand how love could be dismantled so quietly, so completely, while she was still standing inside it. Back in her hotel room, she replayed the day in her mind, obsessively cataloging details. The sound of Ethan's laugh, the way Noah looked at him, as if he were something newly discovered. The ease between them felt like a verdict. She realized then that this wasn't just surveillance. It was participation. She was shaping her days around theirs, adjusting her schedule to stay close, feeding on information that only deepened the wound. The line between witness and intruder blurred until it barely existed. One evening, as rain slicked the streets below, Lena noticed something different. Ethan and Noah argued, not loudly, not dramatically, but tensely. Words were exchanged on the sidewalk, faces tight, movements sharp. Noah walked away first, disappearing into the crowd. Ethan stood alone for a moment, shoulders slumped. Lena felt a dangerous flicker of hope. He pulled out his phone then, typing quickly, pacing. She knew that posture. She'd seen it countless times. After fights, after stress, after moments he needed reassurance. The realization hit her hard. Even here, even with Noah, Ethan was still fragile, still capable of breaking. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She understood now that watching would never be enough. The truth she'd been chasing wasn't just about Ethan's betrayal. It was about her own transformation. Love had narrowed into vigilance. Care had curdled into control. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped asking whether she should confront him and started planning how. The next morning, as she followed Ethan toward an unfamiliar building, Lena felt the weight of inevitability settle in her chest. Whatever happened next would not be reversible. She straightened her coat, quickened her pace, and crossed the street. The distance between them closed. And with it, the last illusion that this could end without consequences. The building was older than it looked from the street, its entrance narrow and dim, as if it had learned to keep secrets by design. Lena followed at a distance as Ethan unlocked the door and disappeared inside. The moment stretched. This was a last chance to turn away, to let the truth remain something observed rather than lived. She didn't take it. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and cleaning solution. Each step echoed too loudly, announcing her presence even as she tried to move quietly. When she reached the third floor, she paused, listening. Voices drifted through a door then in the hall. Low, tense, familiar. Ethan's voice carried first, clipped and defensive. Noah's followed, sharper now. The lightness Lena had seen on the street, replaced by strain. She knocked before she could change her mind. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Ethan stared at her as if she were an apparition, something his guilt had summoned into existence. Lena? His face drained of color. What are you? How did you? She stepped past him into the room. It was smaller than she'd imagined. One window. A bed pressed against the wall. 2 mugs in the sink. Evidence of a life hastily assembled. Noah stood near the table, frozen, eyes darting between them. Up close, he looked younger still, uncertainty written plainly across his face. I followed you, Lena said, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. You never told me the truth, so I found it. Ethan shut the door behind her, the click final, sealing the space. This isn't fair, he said. You shouldn't be here. No, she replied. You shouldn't have left me in the dark. Noah cleared his throat. I didn't know you were coming, he said, as if that mattered. Lena looked at him then, not with anger, but with a weary curiosity. Did you know he was married when you met him? Noah hesitated. Just long enough. He said it was complicated. A bitter smile tugged at Lena's mouth. It always is. Ethan moved between them instinctively, a protective reflex that landed like a slap. This is my fault, he said. Leave Noah out of it. Is that what you did with me? Lena asked quietly. Left me out of it? The room tightened, air thick with words that had nowhere to go. Confession spilled unevenly. Ethan admitting to months of secrecy, to telling himself he was sparing her pain. Noah admitting he believed Ethan was on the verge of leaving, that he hadn't meant to dismantle a marriage, only to live honestly. Each explanation felt rehearsed, insufficient. You rewrote our life, Lena said, her voice breaking at last. You made me doubt myself, so you wouldn't have to face what you were doing. Ethan's eyes filled. I didn't know how to be both people, he said. I chose the one who felt like breathing. And I was drowning, she said. The argument rose and fell, words colliding, circling the same truths without landing anywhere safe. Noah stepped back, overwhelmed. I can't do this, he muttered. I didn't sign up for, he gestured helplessly. This. He moved toward the door. Something shifted then, fast, brittle. Ethan reached out, not to stop him, but to explain, to hold the moment together. Their hands collided. The mug on the table tipped, shattering on the floor. The sound was sharp, startling. Lena flinched. In the confusion, bodies moved too close in a space too small. Voices overlapped. Someone slipped. The room seemed to tilt again, like it had in the mountain sweet days ago. When it stilled, the silence was unbearable. Noah lay on the floor, stunned, breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Blood wasn't everywhere, just enough to be undeniable, a thin line against his temple. Ethan knelt beside him, shaking. Noah, he whispered. No, no. Lena stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might split her chest. This was never what she'd imagined. Not this. Not the weight of consequence, settling all at once. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, or maybe it was only in her head. The room felt suddenly too small to contain what had happened, too final to escape. Ethan looked up at her, terror naked on his face. "Lena," he said, "help me?" She stared at him, at the life that had imploded into this single moment. The door behind her might as well have been a wall. Outside, footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Someone else moving to the building, unaware of the fracture inside one small room. Whatever happened next would belong to records and reports, to questions no one would answer cleanly. And as Lena took a step backward, the silence after the impact settled in, heavy and irreversible, carrying them all toward an aftermath none of them could outrun. The silence arrived first, thick, ringing, absolute. Lena stood rooted where she was, the room's smallness pressing in from every side. The shattered mug lay in pieces at her feet, a crescent of ceramic and coffee spreading across the floor like a map no one wanted to read. Noah's breathing was shallow but steady, a fragile rhythm that anchored the moment to reality. Ethan hovered over him, hands trembling, unsure where to touch without making things worse. "I didn't mean," Ethan started, then stopped. The words collapsed under their own weight. Lena's mind moved in fragments. The echo of Ray's voices. The slip, the sound, sharp and final, of Noah hitting the floor. It replayed without permission, looping, distorting, refusing to settle. This wasn't the confrontation she'd rehearsed in her head. There was no clarity here, no relief, only a sudden, suffocating awareness of consequence. "We need to call someone," Lena said, surprising herself at how calm her voice sounded. Ethan looked up at her, eyes wide. "An ambulance," he said quickly. "We need an ambulance." He reached for his phone, fingers clumsy, dropping it once before finally managing to dial. As he spoke to the operator, his voice cracked, alternating between urgency and disbelief. Lena watched him, detached and intensely present at the same time, noticing how small the room felt now, that it held 3 lives on the edge of something irreversible. Noah groaned softly, eyes fluttering open. Relief surged and then fractured into fear as he tried to sit up. "Don't move," Lena said, kneeling beside him without thinking. She placed a hand near his shoulder, not touching, grounding herself as much as him. "Help is coming." He looked at her, confusion clouding his features. You're his wife," he said, recognition dawning slowly. "Yes," she replied. "I didn't know it would end like this," he whispered. Neither did she. Footsteps passed in the hallway outside, muffled and indifferent. Life continued beyond the walls, unaware of the fracture contained within them. The door felt impossibly far away. The window offered no escape, only a view of the street below, rain-dark and ordinary. When the sirens finally arrived, they sounded distant at first, then closer, slicing through the quiet with procedural certainty. The apartment filled with voices, measured, practiced, efficient. Paramedics assessed Noah, asking questions, shining lights, lifted him carefully onto a stretcher. Each movement felt invasive, necessary, final. Ethan answered questions in short bursts. Lena answered when asked, her words precise, stripped of emotion. She watched Noah disappear through the doorway, the stretcher's wheels clicking over the threshold, carrying with him the life Ethan had been running toward. When the door closed, it felt like an ending. A police officer remained behind, notebook open, eyes attentive but neutral. "We'll need statements," he said. "From both of you." The phrase echoed, "both of you." Lena felt the shift then, subtle but unmistakable. This was no longer a private implosion. It had become a matter of record. Ethan sank into a chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "This is my fault," he said, voice hollow. "I should have told you. I should have ended it differently." Lena didn't respond. She wasn't sure there was a response left that wouldn't shatter something else. At the station later, time lost its shape. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The questions were the same, asked in different ways. What happened? Who moved first? Was anyone pushed? Lena answered carefully, truthfully, aware that each word was being weighed, translated into something colder than memory. When they finally let her go, the city outside felt unreal, its noise too loud, its movement too free. She walked without direction, the rain soaking through her coat, until she found herself sitting on a bench, hands clasped tight in her lap. Her phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. Noah is stable. Relief washed over her, immediately followed by a heavier realization. Stableman alive to tell his version. Alive to remember. Alive to complicate everything. Lena closed her eyes. The truth she had chased across borders had not freed her. It had bound her to a story that would now be told by others. Investigators, lawyers, strangers hungry for certainty. As she stood to leave, she understood that the silence after the impact was only temporary. Soon, the questions would grow sharper, the lines would harden, and the truth, fragmented, uncomfortable, and expensive, would demand its price. The next chapter wouldn't belong to any of them alone. It would belong to the record. The record began before Lena realized she was inside it. Her name appeared in typed lines and time-stamped forms, flattened into statements stripped of hesitation and tone. What she remembered as a blur of fear and fractured seconds became a sequence. Arrival time, distance from the doorway, the angle of the fall. The truth, once personal and burning, was now procedural. She learned quickly that facts did not live alone. They were interpreted. In the days that followed, Lena was called back twice, once for clarification, once because Noah's version had arrived. He remembered the argument differently, not dramatically differently, but enough to matter. He spoke of raised voices, of feeling cornered, of a moment when space collapsed. He didn't accuse Lena directly, but he didn't absolve her either. Ethan's statement complicated things further. His guilt spilled everywhere, uncontained. He took responsibility for the secrecy, for the confrontation, for the tension that filled the room. But when pressed, did anyone push? Did anyone block the exit? His answers fractured into uncertainty. "I don't know," he said again and again. It happened so fast. Lena sat across from him during one of the follow-up interviews, separated by a narrow table. He looked smaller now, diminished by fluorescent light and consequence. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not anger, but recognition. They were bound now by more than marriage ever had been. Outside the official rooms, the story escaped. A local article appeared first, cautious and vague. Then another, sharper. By the end of the week, the incident had been reframed as something darker, something easier to digest. Headlines leaned into implication. Confrontation turns violent. Love triangle ends in injury. Lena stopped reading after seeing her face pulled from an old social profile, cropped and unsmiling. Public opinion moved faster than the investigation. Online, strangers filled the gaps with certainty. Some painted her as a victim pushed too far. Others named her something colder. Every version felt wrong. None felt entirely false. Her lawyer spoke in measured tones, explaining risk, possibility, exposure. "Truth matters," he said, "but so does how it's understood." That was the price. Ethan reached out once, through an intermediary message. "I never wanted this for you." She didn't respond. Intentions felt meaningless now, relics of a time before everything hardened. At night, Lena replayed the moment again, not the fall, but the second before it. The narrowing of space, the rise of voices, the instant when choice blurred into reaction. She searched herself for clarity and found only fragments. Memory, she learned, was not evidence. It was weather, shifting, unreliable, shaped by pressure. Weeks passed. Noah recovered enough to be discharged, though not enough to disappear. His presence lingered in every conversation, every legal update. He was alive, which mattered. He was also hurt, which mattered too. The decision came quietly, delivered without drama. No charges for now. Insufficient evidence to assign criminal intent. Civil proceedings remained a possibility. Everything remained open. Relief came late and thin, threaded with something heavier. Lena understood then that justice was not an ending. It was a process that kept asking for more. She walked the city differently now, aware of eyes that might recognize her, stories that might precede her. The truth had cost her anonymity, certainty, and the simple belief that knowing was the same as healing. One evening, as she packed to leave, Lena paused over her phone. A notification waited. Another update, another interpretation. She didn't open it. Instead, She turned the device face down, reclaiming the smallest measure of control left to her. The new year felt distant, almost unreal. The woman who had toasted a hope on a mountain balcony no longer existed in any version that mattered. As Lena zipped her bag and looked around the room one last time, she knew the story wasn't finished. Consequences rarely concluded cleanly. What remained was the hardest part, the living. And whatever came next would not be about what happened in that room, but about who paid for it and how long the cost would last. Leaving felt less like escape and more like surrender. Lena boarded the flight home with a single suitcase and a weight she couldn't name. The city she was departing had taken on the shape of a wound, one she could circle in memory but no longer inhabit. As the plane lifted, she watched the streets shrink into patterns, trying to convince herself that distance could still mean something. Home was quieter than she remembered. The house echoed with absence, rooms holding the imprint of a life that no longer fit inside them. Ethan's things were gone now, removed by agreement, reduced to lists and signatures. Even his scent had faded, replaced by the neutral smell of time passing. The calendar flipped without ceremony. January slid into February, then March. Each day carried reminders of what the new year had taken. Certainty, privacy, the uncomplicated belief that love moved in straight lines. Lena returned to work, answered questions with practiced neutrality, learned how to exist inside a story that others felt entitled to retell. She avoided mirrors for a while. When she finally looked, she noticed how her face had sharpened, how her eyes held a distance she didn't remember earning. Trauma, she learned, didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it rearranged you quietly. Ethan remained a presence, though no longer a partner. Legal emails arrived at intervals, written in careful language meant to minimize damage. Once, he sent a short message himself. "I hope you're okay." She deleted it without replying. Whatever they had left unsaid was safer that way. Noah's name surfaced occasionally, usually in updates she didn't request. He was recovering. He was moving on. The words landed strangely, as if they belonged to another narrative entirely. Lena realized then that she no longer wanted closure from him, or from Ethan. Closure was a myth people clung to when endings felt too sharp. One afternoon, while sorting through a drawer, she found the ticket stubs from the New Year Getaway. The edges were bent, the ink fading. She held them for a long moment, remembering the champagne, the fireworks, the belief that beginnings could be planned. She threw them away. Spring came late that year. When it did, Lena began walking again, no destination, no tracking, no urgency, just movement. The city felt different under her feet, less like a map to be solved and more like something to pass through. Still, the cost lingered. Trust, she learned, didn't return all at once. It arrived in fragments, conditional and cautious. Some nights, she woke with the echo of sirens in her ears. Other nights, she slept deeply dreamless, grateful for the quiet. The new year had promised change. It delivered it brutally. As summer approached, a letter arrived, official, restrained. Final determinations. No further action. A closing of files, at least on paper. Lena read it once, then placed it in a drawer she rarely opened. The story, as far as the system was concerned, was finished. For Lena, it was not. Standing at her window one evening, watching the light shift across the street, she understood that survival was not resolution. It was continuation. The question was no longer what had been taken from her, but what she would carry forward. In the stillness, she felt the weight of that choice settle in. And somewhere ahead, beyond records, beyond headlines, the last chapter waited not to explain the past, but to reckon with its meaning. Years later, the memory returned without warning. Lena was standing in a different kitchen, in a different life, smaller, quieter, intentionally unfinished, when the smell of something burning reached her, a forgotten pan. Harmless. Still, her hands trembled as she turned off the stove, her pulse racing ahead of reason. Trauma, she had learned, did not need context. It only needed a spark. She opened a window and let the smoke drift out, watching it thin and disappear into the air. The moment passed, but it left behind a familiar reminder. Some things never vanish completely. They settle. They change shape. Time had done its work in slow, uneven ways. The headlines stopped. Strangers forgot. Records stayed filed, untouched. Lena moved cities, changed routines, learned how to answer the question, what happened? With silence instead of explanation. She was no longer defined by the worst day of her life, but neither was she untouched by it. She never heard from Ethan again. Once, she imagined what she might say if she did. An apology accepted. A truth clarified. A past finally put to rest. With time, those imagined conversations lost their urgency. Some truths, she realized, didn't heal when spoken. They healed when they were no longer needed. Noah's name surfaced only once more, in a passing mention from a mutual contact she no longer kept. He had continued traveling, still moving, still becoming someone else. Lena felt no anger at that, only distance. On the anniversary of the New Year getaway, she took a walk alone, not out of ritual, not out of grief, just awareness. She stopped at a small overlook where the city fell away into quiet streets and winter trees. There were no fireworks this time, no countdown, just the steady presence of now. She thought about who she had been that night, standing on a balcony with champagne in her hand, believing love could be preserved through effort alone. She thought about how certainty had blinded her, how silence had been mistaken for peace. The lesson had not arrived all at once. It had been written slowly, painfully, in moments of regret and reckoning. Betrayal rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with avoidance, with half-truths justified as kindness, with silence framed as protection. Secrets don't explode on their own. They accumulate until someone pays the cost. And perhaps the hardest truth of all, seeking the truth at any cost doesn't make you strong. It makes you responsible for what happens once the truth is found. Lena had learned that love without honesty becomes control. That obsession can disguise itself as closure. That justice is not always about punishment, but about accountability, even when it implicates you. She also learned this. You can be wronged and still do harm. You can be a victim and still cross a line. And understanding that does not erase your humanity. It restores it. As dusk settled, Lena turned back toward home. Her steps were steady now, untracked, unobserved. She no longer needed to follow anyone to understand herself. The new year had taken much from her, but it had also burned away illusions she could not have survived intact. What remained was quieter, humbler, and real. Inside her apartment, she lit a candle, not for remembrance, not for mourning, but for intention. The flame held steady, contained, obedient to its limits. Lena watched it for a moment, then blew it out, leaving the room in darkness that felt earned rather than imposed. The story, finally, was hers again, and it ended not with answers, but with awareness.